Wayne Kirkpatrick.
Thank you everybody, and Alan in particular for the invitation to join me tonight. It's nice to be with a large group of people, all of whom love the place as much as I do, and Leslie. Before we get into it, I'd just like to say that we've had a very long association with Thredbo. I was in the advertising industry, and from 1971 to 1979, I did pretty well in advertising. I had Bacardi Rum as a client. I launched Audi cars, Subaru and VW Golf cars in Australia. And Thredbo was a client. A small client, not very profitable one, but one I liked a lot. And I can remember the very first time I went to Thredbo, it was in 1971, the winter. I actually went with my mother. And we went up the chairlift, the Crackenback chairlift. Inevitably it stopped. It was one of those cold, wet, windy days. And I thought to myself, what in the hell are these people doing paying money to do this? Seriously, I thought this is crazy. Anyway, we continued on and I had that long association with Thredbo. John Hagley was the managing director at the time and followed by Michael Matthews, or vice versa. And in 1979 I decided with Leslie that we would go and live in Thredbo for the winter, which we did. We rented a small apartment and stayed there for the winter, and ended up staying 10 years. I didn't buy the place like that bloke who bought Remington or whatever, but we did stay 10 years. In that first winter, Chaz was just asking me what did I do for the first year that I was in Thredbo. Well, I was an information officer, those yellow jackets, the information team. I did the emceeing of special events, I did the snow reports, etc. And we stayed on in the summer, and during that first summer, I worked in the village department, landscaping and doing different things, and we really started to like living there, so we stayed. Very quickly thereafter I was made the marketing manager for the resort, and in 1984, midwinter, they made me the general manager of Thredbo in August 1984. I'd been very vocally critical of the inaction of Lend Lease as shareholders and owners of the place. When we had snow top to bottom, we had very strong market share. And most of the time, of course, skiing the middle slopes, we had very small market share. I employed Don McInnes's mother, Moira, down at the Alpine Way intersection with the Kosciuszko Road to count cars for me every morning. And the numbers were just so revealing. And I said, we've got to have snowmaking. We'd experienced it overseas in the States. And I said, we've just got to have some snow. When we've got snow to the village, you know, people will ski. And when they've got snow and they ski, they don't want to stand in bloody queues either. So we've got to have new lifts. Lend Lease was sort of saying, well, gee, I don't know about this. This is not possible. You can't make snow, can you? And I'll show you in a moment what we did. So that's where it really started. We commissioned Group Delta following this experiment, which I'll show you in a moment. Group Delta was a Canadian company specialist in snow making, and Ted Farwell, a ski area planner from Boulder, Colorado. And we pulled together a master plan that called for some $40 million of investment. That really got Lend Lease's attention, and they said, hang on a minute, we're not sure we want to do this. We're not sure we want to be in the tourism business. And Chaz again was asking me earlier about Dick Dusseldorp. I remember sitting by the Alpine Hotel pool with Dick and subsequently Stuart Hornery at the time, and they were saying, look, we're going to exit tourism. We've got much more money we can make in other things, civil and civic and residential and shopping centres and things like that, and we'd rather put you to work doing things like that rather than selling meat pies and schooners of beer. So I said, well, we can't just leave the place hanging in the balance. I mean, this thing will actually work and add value and the thing will be successful. So that's when the decision was made to sell it. And so it commenced the sale process. We sold to Greater Union. Charles Curran was the then chairman. He did most of the due diligence himself, directly with myself and others. And they decided to acquire Thredbo. As part of the contract of sale, I was retained by Lend Lease and seconded to Greater Union for a 2-year period. But after 12 months, I decided I couldn't really have that parachute safety option. I should really resign from Lend Lease and join Greater Union, since we're presiding over this $40 million of investment. The deal was, at the time, Greater Union paid $18 million to buy Thredbo, but equally at the same time they were committed to spending the $40 million on the mountain works. So it was a $58 million entry price. The beds, the undeveloped beds, some 1,500, they did not buy at the time. They were retained by Lend Lease. And they had the option, Greater Union, to acquire those beds over time at an escalating sale price. But the value of those beds was contingent upon, of course, fixing the hill, the 40 million. So that's why it was contracted as such. So we'll move on and we'll see what happens. The event could not have happened without all of these sponsors. It was quite an exercise to pull together so many people to underwrite the event. And yes, there was a shortfall, which I'm happy to explain a little later. Randy insisted we put these photos in of myself. He wanted to demonstrate and very strongly what happens over 30 years. Thanks, Randy. And thank you, Randy, for pulling the slides and the videos together. That's very good of you. We call ourselves the Australia's premier ski resort, but at times we were kidding ourselves, quite frankly, with skiing to middle slopes only and tired old lifts. And we weren't really in the entertainment business. One of the big pushes that I had was, even on a bad day in Thredbo, it sure still beats standing on Wynyard Station. But we're in the entertainment business. We have to give people a good time, and it's still a holiday, so come down here and have a great time instead of sitting in traffic and doing all those things in the office. And there's some great visuals. These were some of the brochures way back then. This was an interesting thing too. You can't read it, I'm sorry, but Carnival Week. Carnival Week is long gone. That was a wonderful thing for a lot of people with the beer and wine festival, the volleyball, the boxcar derby, the tug of war across the river, and body painting. Things were happening which were very entertaining. Randy, of course, in the early 80s with the Peter Stuyvesant Freestyle Tour. And congratulations, Randy, on all your successes too, with not only moguls but ballet and aerials. And he tells me he hasn't got a sore bone in his body. I've had 2 knee replacements and he's still running around after doing all this sort of stuff. But they were great events. And body painting. Here's the judging panel at the time. Arnold Conrad in the middle, Heinz Reichinger lapping it all up. And the painting was just incredible. It was so clever what was happening at this time. And for the life of me, I don't know why it still doesn't happen. The boxcar derby. Does anybody know Ronnie Plews? Yeah. Well, Ronnie, bless his heart, is in hospital at the moment, St Vincent's. He's not well. He's been struggling with ill health for quite a while. But remember the boxcar derby one day, he and Ken Dinham, I think it was. The boxcar derby started up the hill above Candlelight. They were roaring down as they got to what is now the Denman was Rudy's Lodge. They lost the steering and they ploughed into the side of a car that was parked there and basically wrote the car off, but they walked away. That kind of finished the boxcar derby. This is water ballet in the pool, and I'm in there as one of those silly buggers. The tug of war across the river, that's Wayne Stinson. And in 84, this is the early part of 84, innovation and changes. And this is when we were pushing for snowmaking and lifts and improvements physically to delivering the essential product that we should have in a ski resort. But of course that was still to come. So we had things like buskers, you may remember the buskers and the jugglers, and we put tissue boxes at the bottom of the lifts just to sort of demonstrate, hey, we care, we're trying for you. And it was well received at the time, I do recall. Roland started in 1984, and Roland was a major advantage for us in terms of so many ways of what he contributed to the resort. With the ski school, firstly, in terms of skiing, disabled skiing was a component of that, but then he had this entertainment ability. And I'm sure many of you have experienced Roland and all the boys doing the silly things they used to do, but people were having a terrific time. That's Roland with Frank Prahoda. That's Roland with Pierre, the Frenchman. Pierre and Roland once more with Heinzie in their Australian outfits.
Yes.
with Werner Siegenthaler. Big Hans on the right. Hans was the squeeze box player, you may recall. And that's Valda Windsor. Ernst, her husband, was the general manager of the hotel at the time. That's Rudy Marder down in the front with Michelle. And behind that is Hans and Jürgi. Some of the Austrian boys up in Karela Hut. That's Roland and Rudy. Some of the Austrian boys and girls. And the Andrews sisters. Does anybody remember seeing the Andrews sisters with Roland and everybody? Yes. I mean, it was just so funny. And Phil Deere on the right hand side. Phil's here tonight somewhere. There he is, right there. Phil, you were a part of all this shenanigans. Pierre once more with the ski school. And here's Randy and his Hot Shots business. Gary Holt, Graham Morris, Dougie Edwards down the front, Vero and I think that's Leslie in the background. And DJ Dave with Phil. Roland greeting Len Evans and wife Trish at Cooma Airport. Len was a great supporter of ours. It's interesting, Len with his profile in the wine industry, and eventually I invited him and he joined the board of Kosciuszko Thredbo, and he was a terrific contributor about the concept of excellence, don't compromise, compete on quality, not on price, on the one hand, and yet on the other extreme we had Dougie Mulray. You may remember Dougie Mulray and Ken Sterling. Now, not to say that he wasn't into quality and style, etc., but a funny fellow. And the Thredbo I Like It campaign was so powerful for us during that mid part of the 80s. There's Len with a group of people in the Tom Grogan. Len and Roland enjoying some wines. And in later years, of course, we had Nick Greiner from, I think it was 88 actually, a little bit later, 88. Nick came along and was a terrific supporter of Thredbo and the World Cup event too. Kerry Ann Kennelly and Bernty. Kerry Ann and John, of course, eventually bought a home in Thredbo and lived there for many years. They were great supporters of us. That's Werner and I on snow gums. The slope grooming equipment. Reggae, who's still there with his shops. Michael Cleary was a great supporter, and I'll talk about Michael too and how he was instrumental in helping us with the World Cup. Ian Spees. Ian was the #1 ski school customer. I don't know if you know this, but we had a competition every year who was the #1 ski school customer, and it was all about who spent the most money. And of course you just quietly let certain people know. So there was annually a major competition between Ian Spees and Brian Pollock, the Ford dealer in Canberra. And inevitably Ian won, because even if he was so busy with his burying people business in Sydney, he would charter a ski instructor for the day or for the week, even if he wasn't there. Seriously. It's probably a bit mean on our part, but he loved getting the award every year. George and Hillary. And of course the ski patrollers, with some departed people there, unfortunately, but a great team of people. And this was the team in 1986. We went down to Bateman's Bay and had a conference. Actually, Alan Jones was the keynote speaker for our conference at this event, and it was all about the concept of In Search of Excellence. And it was the book by Tom Peters and Waterman is still a book today that I encourage you to read, because it stood the test of time, and it was a wonderful summary of 10 key things that make businesses work, and they're still valid today. In that year we decided we'd make for publicity reasons, a big snowball, so it became the world's biggest snowball. We had a number of Peter Stuyvesant events, not only the freestyle but the pro race series and this particular event. Which brings me back to the beginning. The good old days, before snowmaking. Now, how can you have a ski resort and charge people to do this? I tend to think in black and white terms, and I was just infuriated by this. I said, it can be fixed. It can be fixed. So, this is the pump that we put into the Thredbo River in winter '85. We just pumped the water out of the Thredbo River. We had a couple of snow guns right next door to Valley Terminal, and we built this bloody great big mound of snow. And there's Roland and Don McInnes and somebody else, I can't recognise who it is in the middle, skiing on the snow. Look at the contrast, snow in the foreground, and that's middle of winter, nothing behind. The Lend Lease Corporation board was coming down to Thredbo for a board meeting that particular weekend. And remember I said, we can make snow, and they said, yeah. I took them over to the Valley Terminal and they went, oh, is that snow? And I said, yes, I told you we can make snow. Hence the commissioning of Group Delta and Ted Farwell to do the ski area planning exercise. The sale process then went ahead as I described at the outset, and this is a photo of Charles Currans in the middle in the foreground and Alan standing over next to the tree on the left. This was the team conference in '87 and we went to the Hunter Valley for that. This is winter with Alan and Roland and Lynn in the foreground, and of course the works commenced. This is Friday Flat. As you can see, it's a construction site. That's the roundabout down at Friday Flat. That's the building under construction at Friday Flat, and that's a more recent photo demonstrating snow. We were in Thredbo last weekend for the federal election, and Friday Flat you could ski on today. Well, you could last Saturday anyway. There's a lot of snow and it looked really good. So it was a very good move, and it was wonderful that Alan and his company decided to support the strategy. This was '88, leading up to then. In parallel, the Australian Ski Federation. This is the Australian ski team in Innsbruck, and nice uniform. Driven largely by Kurt Lance. Sadly departed, but with George and Tommy Tomasi. But Kurt was the driving force behind the Australian Ski Federation and ski racing. He and I had many meetings about, look, now that you're doing all this work, Wayne, and all this is happening, it'd be great to have a ski race. We had major ski races with fist points and things, of course, each year. A number of international teams would come to Thredbo every year and train, because it was good to train down on real snow as opposed to what was available in Europe. And of course, with fist races, they could earn points more easily, because not necessarily did all the hot shots come down that far.
Who did you say the man was in the middle?
George Freuden.
Oh,
So Kurt was a key thing, and there's Kurt again with Tommy Tomasi and Michael Cleary, who was the Minister for Sport, Tourism and Racing, I think from '81, '82 right through until '88. And we're back to staging the event. Coca-Cola sponsored the 1988 Bicentennial Series, which was a precursor to the World Cup. We had to stage a race and satisfy FIS that we could put on a race and run it correctly and properly according to all the FIS rules, of which there were many technical details. And that all went well, so they decided they would pick up the event and go again. And I'll talk about Coca-Cola in the sense that there's a fellow by the name of John Hunter. He and I worked together in advertising way back in the 70s. He left advertising and joined Coca-Cola, and at this stage he was the president for Coca-Cola Asia Pacific. And, hey John, we've got this event, can we please have your support? And he jumped in and continued on to support us. In more recent times, when I was running Hamilton Island, John was then the president of Coca-Cola International, every market in the world except mainland USA. And he was passed over for the top job to include America. That's when he retired. So he joined the board of Hamilton Island then, and John's been a lifelong friend, and we stay in touch. The guide. This was just the front cover of a 30-odd page book, which I've got a copy of here. which was given to all the team managers and officials and competitors, etc. And as I say, the regulations in terms of staging a World Cup event are strenuous in terms of the detail and compliance aspect. So we managed to work our way through all of that. Qantas, and Wendy's here tonight. The lovely Wendy Stainlay and Peter, may he rest in peace. Peter was the Deputy CEO of Qantas and became a very keen Thredbo skier, and also a very keen Gurlos skier with Roland, and we all used to go over to Gurlos together. Peter very, very kindly, and you're still a member of Dalmison, aren't you?
No.
Oh, you're not?
No, a couple of years ago.
Okay. This is Peter having skied funnel web and that little bridge across. This is what we do to our major sponsors. The race committee. I'll read it for you from the top. The World Cup director, John Keane, ex officio. John Keane was the chief of staff for Mike Cleary, and when the Labor government lost the election and we went over to Nick Griner's, Mike Cleary rang me and said, look, this guy's very capable. You should have a look at him in terms of pulling together your World Cup event. So we did, and John Keane did a very good job for us. Hans Schweingruber was the Men's World Cup technical director. He was, it says Austria, I thought he was from Switzerland, but it says they're Austria, so it must be Austrian. He was a very stiff fellow, very formal, very stiff. However, and he wanted everything by the book. However, Roland managed to work out that this bloke really enjoyed Penfolds bin 389. And life became a hell of a lot easier then. Hannes Firstauer was, his home was in Saalbach and Hinterglemm. Of course, the chief of race was Kurt Lance, and then you can see all the other folks there who were in key positions. Shall I move over? Yes. Snowmaking was a really important element of being able to stage the World Cup. I should say, back in that beginning, that first shot, when we put the pump into the river and we made the snow next to the Valley Terminal, Ian Funnell was the fellow who spent all night, every night, with the snow guns. And in the early stages of the snowmaking system, when it was first installed, of course they were pretty rudimentary guns and there were hoses and you had to move everything all the time. Thankless, difficult task. And Ian still lives down in Jindabyne, but he did a terrific job with all of that. The thing that really pleases me about the snowmaking system is that we designed it such that it could be added to, expanded. And the basic infrastructure that was put in place, the compressors, etc., were all sized such that they could take on additional snowmaking areas. And to this day, those same compressors and pumps are still being used. And it's wonderful that Greater Union, or Amalgamated, or EVT, they now call themselves, has gone on with the snowmaking and expanded it and continued to push it all over the hill, because it's made a world of difference, as I'm sure you would all agree. That was the course that was being prepared. It was in wonderful condition. All of the safety nets were being installed. We had terrific publicity. As this was leading up to the event, and as you can see, there was a lot of infrastructure that had to be erected. Finish area. And the opening ceremony. As I said, the course was in great condition, but those of you who may have been there might recall that on the Thursday evening, the opening ceremony and the parades, etc., as we're standing on the dais, it started to rain, like heavily. And then during the night, it started to snow, and heavily. Just when we had rock hard, clean, nice racetrack. We were well helped right throughout by the Army. Rob Josky from the Army Ski Lodge had 120 Army personnel down there for alpine training, was the means by which he managed to get them there. He was a good lad. And we had to get the snow off the bloody course. So that was a big night, Thursday night, getting the course back to where it was. But we had wonderful support from, not just in Thredbo, but in Jindabyne as well. As you can see, all the school kids There are a lot of people, and this is the finish area. We had merchandise that was made. There were cups and badges and sweaters, etc. That was the start area. That's Alberto Tomba, wining and dining in the sunshine. Nick Griner was there, enjoying himself. And this is Mark Hodler, the president of FIS on the left, and Jeff Henke. And I've got to tell you about Jeff Henke. Does anybody here know Jeff Henke? Yes? He was the president of the Australian Ski Federation. As part of the negotiation to secure the event to be staged in Australia and in Thredbo, Jeff Henke and I had to go and make a presentation to FIS in Switzerland. And our dear friend Peter Stanley organised first-class seats on Qantas all the way through to Europe and back. I flew from Sydney to Melbourne, where our flight then originated, and Jeff joined us. Jeff got on flight with a suit and tie, like a 22-hour flight. I promise you he didn't undo one thing. The suit, the tie, the lot stayed on for 22 hours, all the way through to Zurich, and wherever else we went then. Of course, I got on the plane and immediately slipped into something comfy. I couldn't believe he sat there all night in all those clothes. I should also tell you a story as an aside about, that's Barry Atkins, our marketing director at the time. Barry was with me all the way through Thredbo from '84. He then followed me to Ayers Rock Resort for 4 years and then 10 years at Hamilton Island. That's his wife Robin and daughter Pia. And this is the presentations. I should tell you about TUIs. The other thing we had to do, in 1989, February, the Ski Alpine FIS World Championships were being held in Vail. And we were advised a good idea to go over and officially present your credentials and invite all of the teams to come down under in August. So we did, and a good friend of mine still to this day is Bill O'Connell, who was the marketing director for Vail Associates at the time. And he said, Wayne, you know that Alan Bond has a house here in Vail and he's in town at the moment. Alan, of course, owned TUIs. I said, no, I didn't. He says, good idea to invite him, don't you think? You're trying to get sponsors. And I said, bloody good idea. I said, but gee, it'd be even better if we could get some TUIs beer. How do we do that? He said, well, there's none here, but I think there's a store in Denver that has some. So Bill sent a ski instructor to Denver, 2 hours away, to buy the TUIs beer. We sent the invitation to Alan Bond and his finance director at the time, Peter, whose name escapes me.
Bill Mitchell.
Peter Mitchell. That's the fellow. They both showed up. And of course went straight to the icebox and grabbed the TUIs beer. Alan immediately came over to me and said, I hear you're staging a major World Cup event, Wayne. I said, yes we are, Alan. He says, how do I get involved? I said, well, we've got gold and silver and sponsorships. He says, how much is the gold? Is that the best one? I said, yes. I said, it's 250. He says, I'm in. Just like that. And the next morning I received a teletext. We didn't have emails in those days. There was a teletext that came from his marketing director to me at this hotel because he asked me where I was staying. I understand you met Mr. Bond last night. I confirm our sponsorship of $250,000. Isn't that good?
Because you face the meeting.
Yeah, it was. So that's the presentations post the conclusion of the racing. And this is some of the newspaper articles that occurred post the event. I should say, one of the fundamental requirements before we really committed to this was to have the publicity. We knew that there was a risk about how much money we might make in terms of sponsorship and whether there would be a shortfall and we would have to cover the shortfall. But in my view, that was marketing cost. If we're spending $40 million to upgrade the resort, you have to then market and tell the world about it, particularly Australians. It's not a matter of build it and they will come. It's about promoting the advantages and the points of difference that we've created. So the shortfall, I think, ended up in the order of $800,000, but which is only 2% of the 40 million. which is a very low percentage in terms of marketing spend against the capital investment. And in my view, it really was a great stimulus for what Thredbo has enjoyed for a long, long time ever since then. You know, the real estate development, etc., 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 all was kicked off on the back of this whole investment and this particular event, in my view. We also had not only state government through Nick Greiner and co, and pre him Michael Cleary, but we had the federal government through Bob Rowland, the Minister for Sport. Graham Richardson was actually the Minister for Sport at the time of the World Cup, and he was there. And the Australian Olympic Committee, John Coates. They were snooping around trying to think about having the Olympic Games, etc., etc., and therefore this was an event that would be an indicator of Australia's ability to put on a major sporting event. So he was part of our planning and discussions with a whole lot of people, and they were very pleased with the way it all went too. And that concludes the slides. And I'll just see what I might have missed, if any, before we go to questions. Franz Klammer was there, of course, for those who... Actually, who was there during the World Cup? Many people here? Right. Franz Klammer was there. We had to pay him to come. But he skied with people and he said all the right things in the newspapers and the television, and he was very, very pro what happened with the event. Back to Qantas. The sponsorship of Qantas, and this is a FIS requirement, 150 competitors and officials had to be flown to Australia, 150, plus all of their gear, which weighed 26 tonnes. Plus we had the Olivetti and computer systems and the Amiga timing gear. All of that was shipped to Australia by Qantas as part of their sponsorship. We also had a problem with one of the Ingersoll Rand compressors. They were made in Italy, and when the specifications from Group Delta came out and they said we're going to have compressors from Italy, I said, I drive Alfa Romeos and I love them, but I mean, is there a German compressor we can have? Anyway, we went, no, Ingersoll Rand, Italy make the best compressors. Well, one failed, but Peter Stanley didn't hesitate to whack this bloody great big thing that weighed a couple of tonnes on a plane and fly it to Australia for us. It was just fantastic to have such support. Bert Liebersetter was mentioned. Bert, you're one of our forerunners. I think you skied pretty well, as you always do. How was it on the day?
Fantastic job to prepare the course.
Yeah?
I've been around the world for the last 10 years. That course was as good as it could be.
Very good. I'd also like to recognise here this evening Brad Spalding. I've talked a lot about Roland, who is a lifelong friend of ours. We just spent a few weeks with him in Kitzbühel. But Brad followed on soon after Roland as the ski school director in Thredbo. And Brad brought his own set of skills and style and panache to the place and did a brilliant job. And of course he's gone on to even bigger and better things, financially certainly, with Wild Brumby. So welcome Brad, thank you for joining us tonight. And I might pause there and forgive me if I... Oh, no, Telecom. Telecom was another sponsor. They, at their cost, installed 4 kilometres of optical fibre cables, still there today, all over the mountain, because Channel 9 needed to plug into this for the telecast to go back to the whatever they call those things, mobile things, which then sent the signal out. So that was a wonderful thing too. There was just so many people who got behind the event and supported it. And I think that it turned out pretty well. It went very smoothly and a lot of people had a very good time, and I think it was a major fillip for Thredbo and the Australian ski industry to have staged this event and the reputation that it generated. They didn't go on with it in subsequent years, that's another discussion. I actually left at the end of '89, maybe not widely known, but I had been pursued relentlessly by Christopher Skase through 1989 to come and join him and try and fix the problems that he had with Mirage Resorts, Port Douglas and Gold Coast. And I told Alan in June of 1989 that he's worn me down, this bloke. I can't ignore the offer. I have to go, but I'll leave at the end of September. We kept that between ourselves. As you know, I mentioned that I was retained by Lend Lease and seconded to Greater Union. So I was talking to Stuart Hornery and John Morshell, and they said, Wayne, don't do it. Where there's smoke, there's fire. I said, but hang on a minute. Look, and look at the salary they're paying Leslie. I mean, she's not going to do anything. I have to do this. So I went, and 4 months later, Quintex collapsed. Lesson learnt. But I spent 4 years there, and I was glad that I did in hindsight, because I learned an awful lot about banks, about litigation, about hotel management companies, etc., etc., etc.
The irony is then they end up owning it again.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's right. So there we go. Thank you for your patience and giving me the opportunity to speak. I think I'm on time, and I think you want questions. Is that right?
There's questions from the floor, anyone?
Yes.
Did the Qantas and other major sponsors feel they got value for money? What was the feedback from your sponsors?
That's a hard question. It's 30 years ago, for God's sake. Look, I believe so. My recollection is yes. Look, the exposure was very powerful. 200 million people looked at this thing over a 3 or 4 day period on television, White Whale Sport, plus all of the press media and magazines. And I think it was a connection with government, just the coming together of so many different groups of people and work harmoniously. It was a feel-good thing.
And for the next 10 years, you couldn't get a VB in Thredbo.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, and Coca-Cola signed up and TUI signed up.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
yeah, there was a commercial reward for them.
And how did you make the snowball?
That was out of just snowcats pushing it together and then shovels.
Obviously, there was an enormous challenge that you faced in terms of trying to develop the industry and snowmaking, all that sort of stuff. How do you see, or do you have a view about where sort of Thredbo and the Australian Alpine resorts are now in that same sort of context?
Yes.
Future development of the challenges that they have.
When I bought Hamilton Island as management buyout with a partner back in 2003, and then sold my shareholding at the end of 2005, and then we moved back to live in Thredbo. So I then spent early 2006 to 2017 living back in Thredbo. So I've experienced firsthand the place again. I've lived a total of 22 years in Thredbo, plus the 7 years or 8 years prior when I was in the advertising industry. I think what Thredbo has done in recent times for the summer businesses is fantastic. The investment in mountain biking has brought a lot of visitors to the region. The spending pattern is quite different. There are businesses in Thredbo who are saying, well, yes, there's a lot of people here, it's chock-a-block all the time, but they're not spending stuff in my shop. Yes, the supermarket's busy and the pub might be busy, but this isn't, the restaurant may be not going well. The investment in snowmaking that they've continued to do, I think, is good, essential. Until they announced the more recent 50-odd million investment in Thredbo, I've been very critical about it and talked to Jordan Rogers and to Alan about it, saying, you're resting on your laurels. I mean, the value for money and the quality of the skiing experience in the States, and look at the people who are flocking to Niseko and Hakuba in Japan, where so many people are skiing overseas because the quality of the skiing and the value for money is stronger. And you have to do something. You have to invest, and you have to keep pace, and you have to be competitive. So I'm pleased that they've announced the major investment that's about to be undertaken. Would I have spent the money on putting a gondola to Merritts as opposed to a lift that opens up new terrain, as opposed to creating additional super trails? I think the skier density is very high. The super trails, that Crackenback Super Trail and the High Noon Super Trail, you take your life in your hands, there's so many people there. You see, you go back, in 1989, I think Australia's population was about 18 million people or thereabouts. No, 16 it was. And today it's like 25, 26 million. If it's the same proportion of the population of skiing, there's a whole lot more people skiing, and we've seen that, and nothing changed in terms of capacity of slopes and lifts. Perisher has even got a bigger problem. Last winter, you may or may not have known that on many, many occasions, their car parks were full. They closed the road and turned people back. Now, this is despite collecting all that money through the gate, and they have not expanded the car parking. Not one more bed has been built in Perisher, and they're putting in a new lift this winter. But it's just a bloody disaster. Nobody has got the forethought. You know, it's a cash cow sort of syndrome. Because the demand is so strong, the experience, despite this, is good, and they come anyway. Well, I think that's the wrong way to run a business.
Absolutely.
Yes?
How much of that is due to the interface with the national parks?
For a long time, and still to this day, in terms of expanding skiable area, terrain, is difficult because of environmental considerations, etc., etc. However, within the leased areas, like within Perisher, Vale Associates is very keen to have a head lease and invest in building beds and expanding the lifts, etc., etc., etc. They just can't come to a commercially acceptable agreement with national parks or the government at the moment. So they've said, well, you know, talks continue.
Would this ever happen again? Would we ever have another world-class race?
You'd have to ask those folks. I mean, somebody that might be prepared to have a go and can see the value, can put all the effort in, possibly. Look, in direct terms, it's not a profit-making exercise. You don't spend X dollars and expect to get a 15, 20 return on the investment straight away. We had a different motivation at the time, and I think it was relevant and it was important for the place. But there was resistance back then. I think Chaz was saying to me, Albert Vanderlee, who preceded me down there, was anti the idea of having a World Cup, and it was fanciful to even try and pull the thing together. Well, my view is nothing's impossible. You just got to work harder than the rest.
You can't run downhills.
Sorry?
You can't run international downhills.
No, but that's possible. That's possibly true, but that's but that's not necessarily the be all and end all. I mean,
You can't have a full suite of events.
no, that's true. True.
So it's
Any
not-
more questions? We need to move on some of that.
What do you think was the major nugget of your success in terms of actually getting the World Cup together and the outcomes from it? It was like the foundation stone of all the success.
Look, I think we built the argument on the basis of we're spending all this money to improve finally the resort and make it skiable, snow, and improve lifts, much better experience, built on the back of, hey, we've got to entertain people and give them a good time with live music and da-da-da-da. This is a means by which we can showcase the place. Ta-da! Look what we've got, come and experience it. It still required an awfully strong resolve amongst a group of people to go through the processes of gaining approvals. Not so much approvals, national parks weren't in the position to say no. I'm not talking about that sort of approval. I'm just talking about convincing a board of directors, shareholders, that this is an intelligent thing to do, and then to go down the sponsorship path and convince a whole stack of people that they should jump on board and support the event, including state and federal governments who put money in. So there's just conducting an orchestra and trying to get everybody to sing the same song.
Any more questions? We do have to move because some ladies are very worried about you having hot food. One more question, last question.
I remember being told that when you switched the snowblowers on, Jindabyne went out. Is that true?
No, it didn't go. It dimmed a little bit. Yeah, it's true. And I think it's got worse, hasn't it, these days, with what's happening in Australia today? I shouldn't get into politics. Please say.
Okay, Wayne, well, thank you very much. We do have to-
Thank you.